Oh, that's the name of the thing.
Luxurious. Anyway, look.
Yeah.
Classic. Oh, I've got the beard and you did the move. Who the fuck are you? Why are you on a nerdy podcast or whatever this is?
Because of you, maybe. Yeah, it's probably the simplest. In so many ways, that is the answer. Because you invited me.
To the planet, really.
It's like really cliche how similar we look. Normally, you know, cut to. Shall I provide an image of me with a luscious mullet only days before this?
Yeah, no, that was a bit of a shock.
Full Con Air, you know, just flown in the breeze.
Luxurious. Anyway, look.
Yeah.
This is my son, by the way, this human here. We don't look and sound like peas in a pod. By no accident, there's a genetic connection. And that connection of rolling dice and chatting shit is what you're going to have to suffer if, or you know, you can click away. It's the internet.
Yeah, it's essentially like the conversations that we've had for hours over the last few years, especially with, well, the last year with stuff.
Yeah.
There's been some, you know, some fruit to come out of these topics where we overthink shooting each other and playing toy soldiers.
But I think I've only ever fired spells at you, or maybe an arrow or two playing Frostgrave. I don't think we've ever shot bolt rounds or anything at each other yet.
We played like Necromunda once.
True. Now that was a very long time ago. Wrong side of the shirt. That was at the Geek House where myself and the OG members of Hate Club used to gather and roll dice, play Blood Bowl primarily, get into Necromunda, 40k.
Blood Bowl primarily.
Yeah, I'm privileged really. It's like I know all the founding members of this illustrious club have, spanked me about a tabletop many a time. Which
why do you nerd?
Like I remember being in a car. Probably like 10 or something, and it's like, you and your brother, my uncle, like, kind of both saying to each other, like, kind of sidebar, like, do you think he's, got enough knocking about up there now that, like, we could run, I think it was like Heroes, like run Heroes, and I was like, what's this? And it was probably because I just said something, that like, I'm watching an X-Men cartoon or a Spider-Man cartoon or some shit like that.
Geek culture and comic books becoming more prevalent in film and TV.
There's like a massive like interlinking between those like things for me in terms of like gaming and like tabletop and roleplay or whatever. I mean, we haven't really touched on it, but like I'm more a role player. You do a lot more tabletop, but I'm kind of dipping my toe into tabletop. You do a bit of role play and stuff as well, and always have. But yeah, like my introduction, my knowledge of like tabletop gaming and like role play, it was role play. But yeah, it was really, really tied to like superheroes and that kind of rise of nerd culture, I suppose, like becoming popular culture. You asked the other day about like, well, yeah, or my version, which is seen a lot more love.
Yeah.
Well, you weirdly have probably run it more now than I did.
And it's like, for me, for years, for me and my friends, like, we'd never played D&D. We play D&D now, like, we're familiar with it. We jumped on a 5e. We did a bit of Pathfinder, and then 5th edition. But like, yeah, like for years and years and years, like the longest time throughout like all of senior school and stuff, we were running a game which most people would consider to be unplayable. Like when you talk to like the nerd community and it's like, Palladium, they're like, oh, rifts, and it's like, no, like, we played Heroes Unlimited, and it was like, but yeah, I mean, it was the way you introduced it to me. So yeah, off of the bat of that kind of conversation with your brother, then it kind of, you introduced it to me, and it was this kind of thing of like, you acknowledge the flaws, but it was like, you know, and then just ignored the stuff that didn't work, and that was what we took on, and I think that really helped me, or helped us, in the way that we kind of developed to like thinking about like how rules work and how role playing works. It's like, well, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, change it. So it's like,
hand wave that if it's
or fix it. Like, you know, figure out something that works better. Like, think about
something you said the other day about a Reddit thread or something. You what was it? Oh, an archer wanted a buckler or something, and it's like
so this DM was kind of, it was on like, you know, DM advice or something, and it was like, you know, one of my players has cited historical precedent for archers having a small shield and, as you say, a buckler. That, you know, and you know, just quickly, it's like in D&D, a shield, you need to wield it with one hand. It takes one hand to wield, and you automatically get a +2 to your armor class. And this player had basically said, can I have like a +1? It's a buckler, but it doesn't, you know, I don't need to hold it, so I can, and like, there was historical precedent for it, and you know, whatever. And there was all these answers of like, people like, oh, you know, you need to, you know, talking about punishing the player or discouraging the player. And I just had this thing of like, you can let them do it, but if it's a thing, then other people will also do it, including their enemies. Like, and it's also like, people have this idea that like a +1 to AC is gonna like break the game, and it's like, nah, like, you'll be fine.
yeah, it's 20 sides on that dice. It's all right.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's, and I think maybe that partly did come from like, I mean, we'll probably touch on it loads of times. There's so much that I owe to like my like gaming philosophy that comes from Palladium, Heroes Unlimited, and just how like shit it is.
There's very little consistency through these games, and much like Rogue Trader, that first edition mess of roleplay games, where, you know, there's a different system and a different dynamic. There's not a consistent thread.
Well, that was the blessing and the curse of, in a kind of nice way, is like, because it was so many systems kind of bolted onto each other. If you didn't like one, you just didn't do it. Like, we didn't do psychic stuff. We didn't do magic because they relied on kind of like a weird, like, mana, essentially. It wasn't called mana, but it was like, you know, that you had to, it would deplete and then replenish in game time. And if anyone knows, like, that's run a game, like, as soon as you try and differentiate between game time and real time, it becomes a fucking nightmare. More often than not, where it's like, has it been an hour? Has it been 45 minutes? Like, do you know what I mean? But then we would, so often, it's like, if one of us wanted to be a wizard or be a psychic person, you'd just be like, okay, well, roll those powers on the regular power list or whatever, and we'd just be like, it's magic.
Skin it, yeah.
Exactly. It was a reskin. Like, we would do reskins all the time, and we always had that want of like having things tied together. So it was always that weird, like, magical feeling that you get when you like roll up the power. I mean, making a character in that system was just like chef's kiss until you got to skills. Known you for a long time. You're responsible for my introduction. Known you for a long time, yeah. But like, I actually don't know. Like, what was your, you know, first introduction to the hobby?
Well, it's White Dwarf magazine, with all of its, you know, it had roleplay games in it, it had tabletop stuff in it, the Warhammer stuff, and then I started picking it up from W.H. Smith's, going shopping with Mum on a Saturday, and my brother and I pouring over and seeing these amazing models and stuff, and Space Marines were starting to come up.
Right. How old are you at this point?
10, 11.
Right, okay. Oh, that's weird. So it's like a similar sort of
Yeah.
age, yeah.
I guess it's that kind of that age where you're going from juniors up to, secondary school.
Yeah.
You're kind of asking you've been told what you're into, and now you're starting to ask, what am I into? Like, what things do I want to seek out?
I don't think I was self-aware enough to know that I was asking myself that.
Retroactively, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Hindsight.
yeah.
So, the pocket money was, what little of it there was, got spent on the odd bits and bobs up at Tottenham Court Road going into central London, when a 12-year-old kid at this point was allowed to get his 1 to 4 travel card and go into central London while the IRA are blowing up parts of it. And it was like...
That's mental.
Yeah, I know, it's quite weird, isn't it?
Imagine.
The nuclear cloud from Chernobyl. Yeah. There's, the nuclear cloud from Chernobyl is blowing in as well, and there's like sheep in Scotland growing a third eye. But it's in the rain. We would constant conversations about acid rain, and this nutty Games Workshop stuff kind of seeped into my consciousness. My dad was always a sci-fi nerd. We would always watch Tomorrow's World. My dad's a lab technician and engineer, and then got into drag racing when his job went to India.
Road drag racing, not bring back my girls.
He did have a perm. He did have a perm in the 80s, but it wasn't like RuPaul.
Yeah.
No. We'll keep that in though.
Your dad's the nerd.
Yeah, so he was into H.G. Wells. We had the almost ubiquitous Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds 4 records that I would regularly put on the record player and then sit there painting Space Marines.
A dwarf just catches your eye as like a kid, like you'd never heard anyone talk about it. It was just something you saw in W.H. Smith's, and you were like, "That's a bit of me."
Yeah, and it was the classic D&D group at school in the design technology building that gathered, and it was like the real kind of like the smelly kid, the overweight kid, the really mathsy Indian lad. It was just like, if an American writing pool had designed this group of nerds, here it was. And I was always that kid that kind of like bounced around social groups. So I didn't care that the sporty boys would take the piss out of me for having a game of D&D.
It was kind of like, that seems fun, I'll do it. It's
what, you're going to take the piss out of me for doing this? It's like, well, I like it. So what?
Yeah, and again, that's interesting. Is like, it's like I'm kind of like seeing the similarities and also like the little differences, because it's like, oh yeah, I had a dad that was into sci-fi, so I grew up watching sci-fi, and then like for me it was like, it wasn't cartoon. It wasn't like comic books. It was cartoons. It was like Spider-Man cartoon, Batman cartoon, like all these animated series. That was like my introduction. Like I didn't read a Spider-Man comic until I was like, until I had a job. Like, do you know what I mean? Because it was like, comics are expensive. You can't just buy an issue because it makes no fucking sense.
Yeah.
Actually, I tell a lie. I did read a Spider-Man comic. It is the first comic that I bought, and it was in W.H. Smith's, and it was with you. I remember like reading it cover to cover, just this one single issue that made no sense, but it was sick because it was like Spider-Man, and he's fighting Morbius, who is like a vampire guy, and obviously I was like, oh, sick. And I think it was kind of overlapping with like Buffy. So I was like, oh, I know what vampires are.
Kind of going back to what I was saying about, my group at school and how there was bullying in there. Are you the last generation to be bullied at school for being nerds? You know, now you see kids wearing nerd.
I do kind of sometimes wonder, I'm like, oh, like, am I the last, you know, is that what a millennial is? It's like the last person to remember, like, this sort of stuff just not being cool, like, in any way.
Yeah.
You know, I still think there's, like, an obsession, right? And it's like, you know, you kind of get it where it's like, anything. I think you'll still get people that, yeah, it might be ripped if, like, they go to school in their Spider-Man costume, you know, on non-school uniform day. But I don't think it's like, yeah, it's not uncool to, like, watch their Marvel films. It's not uncool to watch the DC films. It's not uncool to, you know, have graphic novels necessarily.
Yeah, to be a nerd or a geek is just to be passionate about something.
Yeah.
Perhaps to an obsessive level, but
yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's like, I think that's what teens actually like focus in on. It's not like, oh, this thing isn't cool. It's like, oh, you care about something?
Gasp, caring. Wow, yeah.
Like, yeah, you know, maybe even wasn't as confident as you. Like, there was a D&D group, whereas like there was no one at my school, you know, role playing, and it was like my group of friends, you know.
Oh, they were hidden away. This was.
Oh mate, it was like big time. It was like we'd called it rolling, and it was this really funny thing where like we found out in like the final year of like senior school when like we'd kind of got a bit more lax and we were more comfortable in our own skin and like whatever. But it was this really funny thing of like one of the other kids in our like class or something told us that they always just assumed that we were like big time stoners because we were always talking about rolling. You're like, you rolling this weekend? Yeah, man, I'm rolling.
That bag of green dice came in handy because they just.
We were always very secretive and like protective over our like, you know, what was in our bag, because sometimes we'd bring the book into like school so that you could then like go around your mates afterwards. Yeah, got that baggie.
Your dice in that nice wooden box and they just assume it's full of fucking paraphernalia.
Yeah, paraphernalia, accoutrement. No, it was just like there's still to this day like one of the funniest things to me. It was just like, oh, we were just like thought you were like low key stoners. Like, nah, not then at least.
Well, you know, check out Gandalf, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was Gandalf the grey, Gandalf the green, Gandalf the white, Gandalf the fucking pink.
Gandalf the White's a dickhead. He's just always right in your face.
So, I mean, without this enforced pause on everything, you and your mates were kind of dabbling in tabletop or finding your way. It was a fairly new thing.
Yeah, so a couple of my friends, like, again, it's one of those weird things where, you know, hiding your geek stuff. But it's like, two of my friends, like, for years, would, like, do tabletop stuff with each other and, like, their dads, because their dads were friends from, like, work, and, like, they would play all sorts of different, like, games and pieces, and just, like, we weren't even aware, because that was, like, a whole other level of nerd, or, you know, whatever, and it was kind of a family thing, you know, so they didn't talk about it, but when one of my friends got married, like, I met his dad, and, like, got on with him enough that he was like, oh, like, you know, you do like gaming and stuff like that. I was like, yeah. He was like, oh, like, come along. And then, yes, like, for, you know, months after that, I would once a month go around there, and we would have, you know, I think it was, you know, the most of us would be like 10.
Wow, as many as that.
There might be like,
because it's like cousins and, you know, generations and stuff like that.
Playing board games, or what's the board games and tabletop?
So it's just strictly tabletop, but it's like
Was it Walking Dead? I remember you talking about once, maybe, or
Zombicide. Zombicide is one that they've played a lot. I haven't actually got to play Zombicide yet, but it sounds like, you know, quite a fun game.
I played it through once down at the club. Yeah, I liked it. Good. You know, it's got some tabletop elements just with the models, and you get that physicality of moving from room to room. And
it's kind of like borderline about beer and pretzels type thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I like that. It was easy enough to get into.
So like we played it because my friend got a like a Batman game, like that was like a Kickstarter thing, which I guess is like tabletop. I mean, you have miniatures and there's like rules for like movement, and you can be, you know, Batman, or you can be Nightwing, or you can be Robin, and it's, you know, or Batgirl or Batwoman, and they all have slightly different abilities and stuff, which is quite cool. I liked it. It was, you know, it's smartly designed. They do a good job of, like, you know, you feel like Batman. You get all like the Batman villains and Batman, you know. The weird thing with that game, I always kind of had a thing, and again, it kind of goes back to that, like, the introduction with like role playing. I'm always a bit like, yeah, but why can't I do this other thing that Batman can do?
Yeah.
It's very like, it's almost video gaming in that, like, you have certain move sets.
Yeah.
And like for me, that's often been my like barrier with like tabletop, is because it's like it's this fantasy.
Yeah.
But you can't do all the
things. Yeah.
But what, like, why?
There's a lot of that. People are like, you've got a tank that's 5 inches long that can only shoot 24 inches. It's like, you know, you can shoot a big gun or a rifle, and you have to account for the curvature of the earth. Yeah, okay, but we're on a... How big is your dining room table is the answer to that. I have to answer that with a question.
I don't so much mind that, because that's like a mechanical conceit.
Yeah, it's an abstraction. You have to abstract.
Yeah, it's an abstraction. Like, this represents a tank, you know, however you want to look at it. You know, it's like hit points is always the one, like, in D&D or role playing, where people always get like, oh, you know, doesn't make any sense. And it's like, no, it's just you're not constantly getting stabbed. And like by the end of a fight, you just pull out all the swords and go, oh, and then you feel better when you have a short rest. It's like that's the same abstract. I'm fine with like abstractions, but like it's more, like a limitation I just don't see as like needing to be there. Because I'm like, again, it's like you're learning all these rules, and I'm like, oh, well, I've learned, you know, there's all these rules here in this book, but I'm still not able to like do the thing, like all the things that a Batman could or should be able to do. I'm like, I could do way more, like, especially again, like coming from like a role-playing thing. I'm like, oh mate, like, I could, you know, we could roll 6 stats and then I could run this game using this map, using these minis, and give you a better game of playing Batman than this game. Do you know what I mean? Like, there is a sick Batman game and it's called fucking roleplay, mate. Like whatever you want it to be.
Run it off the back of Heroes Unlimited or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever, Black Hack, whatever game you like. Yeah, there's a... You just reskin it.
Yeah, just reskin it.
It's almost like my war cry.
Yeah, I mean, that is big time my war cry. Yeah, just fucking reskin it. It's like, it doesn't matter.
That's a good way to pull you back to the tabletop stuff, war cry. You're talking about, they do some tabletop stuff, some skirmishy stuff, Necromunda, war cry,
Kill Team, which was because again, it was like this weird thing of like, so he played like a Batman game, a Conan game. The Conan game's really, really fun. That's cool. Played a Hellboy game, which again was from a Kickstarter. And when they were like painting all these minis, and again, my friend was like getting into painting minis. He's sickeningly good at it. Like, he started like a year ago. Yeah, he's a freak.
Link him. His stuff's amazing. It's like, how long's he been painting? How many weeks? What? Yeah. Fuck off, mate.
But then, like, I saw the quality of his paint and was like, oh, knowing like you and your hobby and stuff like that, and I was like, have you ever like painted any like 40k stuff? And he was like, no, because it was all kind of like bolt action type games that they would play if they did like wargaming, because like the old boys are like well into their kind of like battle reenactment type miniature wargaming.
Yeah, brown. Everything's brown.
Yeah, everything's brown. Yeah, And I was like, oh, just because from a painting perspective, the miniatures are so detailed, and you don't get as many like unfortunate mould lines, and there's a little bit more you can do with how you put it together and stuff like that. And he was like, oh yeah, I'll check it out. And then he dipped his tone, and immediately was like, like all over it. So then he's kind of then essentially bullied us all into getting like 40k stuff so that he has someone to smash his toys against.
What is this? I've spent so many hundreds of hours painting these things. Now, what are they for? Yeah. I mean, recently you've been painting stuff, and you've clearly there's the kit bashing stuff flows through your veins as well, because you're.
Yeah.
You talk about that because I know why I do it, and I could wax lyrical for hours. But what has?
To be honest with you, like that's the thing that I enjoy more, like at the moment, that appeals to me more than anything else. It's like, I don't know, that's it's weird because we talk about the hobby, and maybe this is something for another conversation, but it's like we talk about the hobby, but I've said it before to you, it's like, but it's so many other little hobbies.
It is all the hobbies.
Yeah. Tactical wargaming, it's a social thing, it's modelling, it's painting, it's whatever else I'm forgetting.
3D printing. If you get a 3D printer, you've got another hobby, and that's running your 3D printer. You can.
The terrain, there's and I really enjoy that kind of like that character thing, maybe of like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna like get this thing. I'm gonna like, make this thing, and it's gonna be like this unique, interesting, like evocative image, like piece. That's what I find exciting. And I'm not even necessarily paying any mind to like how I'm gonna play it. I'm just like, oh, he's got 4 arms. I literally made a mini, and I was just like, I want a mini that has 4 arms, because and like spent probably too much time figuring out how to make a Chaos Marine with 4 arms. And it's like, and afterwards I'm like, I don't even care, like, if it has to count as one big gun, so be it. Like, it doesn't matter to me. I just wanted something that looked fucking cool. Like, I wanted someone to see that mini and go, oh, like, that's fucking weird. Like,
you'd been inspired by an artist or somebody, an illustrator you'd seen on Instagram, and that sprung.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, so Goblin Tom. I don't know the guy's real name, but that's like his Instagram handle. I mean, I presume Tom, but but like Goblin Tom is his thing. Check him out. Really, really like, again, like evocative, like artist that does a lot of this kind of like fantasy-esque art, but like not in a like Frank Frazetta kind of like style. I really love it, and I just love like the use of colour and like the way like messes with proportions, and I used a lot of his like stuff. It's just like a fun exercise, like just something to do. Like,
you've done lots of drawing and watercolour, and now all of a sudden you're painting a small 3-dimensional object. Different brushes, same brushes?
Yeah, I mean at first it was the same brushes, and then realised I needed some smaller ones. So that definitely kind of influenced like the way I thought about it. It was weird to just like use a different type of paint, even. Like figuring out the acrylic.
So I didn't have to tell you too strongly to water down your paint, because that's the...
Yeah, exactly. Although, I mean, it was like still interesting for me kind of finding that like fine tuning. I still don't know if I found it, do you know what I mean? It works for me, but I'm like, is this too thin or is this too thick, or I don't know. I kind of play around with it a little bit, but
brand to brand, paint to paint, it's just so different. Everybody's learning.
But in terms of like, yeah, that definitely like my drawings, my paintings inspire me, and then the things that would inspire me to draw and paint also inspire my miniatures. So the artist Goblin Tom that I follow on Instagram, like his stuff is all watercolors and like illustration. And like inks and stuff like that. But like, yeah, like I look at his and I'm like, oh, what would that be if it were on a 3-dimensional, kind of piece? Like, I always think it's cool to kind of like, you know, I think you could base a miniature off of a painting, even if it doesn't have a physical body to it. You just pick the colours from that palette and the composition of that palette. Do you know what I mean? Like that to me, like, I mean, like in my day job, I'm a hairdresser. I've done like composition and like editorial like shoots. I've done like, you know, competitions and like editorial stuff, and it's like for like colour, and I've literally like, you know, it's not like a crazy thing to do either, but like I've based a lot of the time, like when I'm basing like an idea for what I do on someone's hair, and this isn't like regular clients, but like when we're doing like weird stuff, it'll be like an image that I saw in a design magazine of a living room and I'm like, oh, like that, you know, I really love the way that nice warm light is working with that really vivid green wall and that pink sofa or whatever, and then I'll like try and like almost like capture that and like put that, and I do the same thing with the minis. I'll be like, oh okay, like I really like that painting just because of like the composition of the colour and the light and the way like there's different, and I'll be like, let's put that, what would that look like on a Chaos Marine? And like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, like, you know, sometimes you get a little bit too clowny and then you have to like
dull it down,
wash it back,
like, but like that's part of the fun of it, and like that's the kind of like little challenges I enjoy. So I definitely, like, for me at the moment in the hobby, as much as I do enjoy like mechanics and stuff, I'm far too intimidated to kind of really throw myself in that, and I find like sometimes I kind of overthink that sort of stuff, whereas like the modelling, the minis. Pardon?
When you say mechanics, you mean
like in terms of gaming mechanics? If you think like that's a part of the hobby, a big part of the hobby, obviously. Like the rules, basically the game. I'm a bit like, oh, like I don't know if I'm, because for me as well, I felt like when I looked at that first, it was like I was, you know, analysis paralysis. I was like, when I was trying to think of like my army from a rules perspective, I was like overthinking it, whereas to me it's like I'd rather just make a load of like minis that I think are cool, and then I can more or less, you know, I might upset some real, you know,
the neckbeards. I mean, it's the thing I love about the 40k universe, Games Workshop's thing, is that they've deliberately made it massive. They've deliberately left you big gaping chasms where you can riff off. Because your first model you built, I think it was your first, or the first one you painted, I think, was a Great Possessed, one of the newish models.
It was the second one I did, but yeah, I mean the first one.
So, so that was your first one was the white one. Now, of course, you're saying, oh, they don't look great, but you know, you take a photograph of your miniature and you're that much closer and you see so many more details and bits you've missed and bits you want to clean up. So, you know, but nobody should beat themselves up about that. Use that as a technique for improving your painting and modelling and stuff.
I mean, I've intentionally kept it, not stripped it, not primed it again, kept it as a kind of, you know, a chronology. I always kind of decide on a point of when I'm going to put down that mini and just take what I've learned and bring it to the next model, to the next piece. Rather than trying to, you know, forever perfect it.
Yeah, and you shouldn't compare yourself to other people's masterworks that have been are naturally gifted and have been painting for 10 years, 15 years, and so on. You compare yourself and your painting to your last painting, and if there's some improvement, great. Yeah. If not, you know, your next one might be even better still.
There is some value in comparing yourself to others, you know, as controversial as that might sound, because it's like, that's what gives you that motivation, right? Yeah, I think that you've always got to have your own kind of like progress in mind as well at the same time, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Not get disheartened. Yeah, say those terrible models don't dishearten me. If anything, it's quite nice because I look at that jump from like first one to second one, and I'm like, you know, that's pretty good.
If you've only got 6-7 models, that's early days. yeah, you can improve by doing a squad and doing the same thing on 5 models. You'll get better in different ways. There's so many different ways to improve yourself, and repetition. Just paint more, do more.
But yeah, the first one that is probably, you know, worth looking at. Yeah, it was a greater possessed, and that was kind of talking about what we were mentioning. I forgot about that actually. That was based off of bugs. Like I looked at a load of images of like insects, and like, because I just had this idea of like, you know, it's got the big claw arm, and I was like, I want it to be gross, but like also kind of beautiful at the same time. So I'm looking at all these like pictures of beetles and scorpions and like the weird little intricate like markings that they have on their exoskeleton and stuff, and just trying to like bring those colours and stuff into the mini. But I learned a lot from that, because it was cool, it was like rewarding, but it was a little bit bland. Yeah,
you felt he was quite muddy.
Yeah.
And for me, that's the tricky thing with a mini, especially when it's like meant to be, you know, you don't want it to clowny, but then on the other hand, it's like, you know, I think we've spoken about it before, is that like you've got like blanc jitsu, but then quite often it becomes bland jitsu, where it's like you might as well have just like dipped it in motor oil and like been done with it. Like,
yeah, you can, and I do. Not literally motor oil, but you the way you're mixing it up, it bloody well looks like it. It just smells worse. But it's that thing of, you know, how close. If your model is meant to be looked at like there, as a display piece, or as a, you know, in a skirmish army, you're going to get that much closer to it than you are a 2-foot army, which is an army which is 1,500 points. I can't get my hands in shot, you know, it's because it's that big an army with that many, you know, however many. If it's a horde army with Tyranids or Orcs, it might be, you know, 100 or more, whereas a Space Marine army might be 40, 80.
Like that kind of really gritty, realistic, like looking Space Marine, like that looks like it's just been dragged through the dirt, and it's like you believe it's on the battlefield. When there's like, you know, several of those on the table, can kind of just look like a brown mess.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like when you pick up each individual one, you're like, oh, that looks sick. Whereas like the slightly clownier ones sometimes look actually a little bit more exciting to look at on the table. It's like, oh, like, so, you know, some vivid colours. And it's like, for me, it's finding that balance, because I don't like them looking too clean and crisp, because it's like, well, they're, especially chaos, it's like they're meant to be gross. But I often, you know, I really get inspired by, at the moment, what stuff I'm looking at is like images of like mould, and like, yeah, just like, you know, that like all different types of mould. Like, you know, I think of the film Annihilation, with Natalie Portman. It has those, and that kind of nails that like gorgeous, but also like disgusting and like slightly unsettling.
That's chaos. That's chaos.
And that's chaos, right? Like that is chaos, and it's like.
That film is like.
That's chaos, right? Like that is chaos, and it's like.
Is it Zinch? Is it, you know? Is it the decay of Nurgle? Is it the weird twisting of Zinch? Yeah. There's a skull in there, so it's clearly Khorne.
It's like when you see that.
It's like when you see that kind of green-blue film on top of like some Dairy Lee, and you're like, I know I shouldn't, but it does look nice. It's like, because you know what it is, it's sickening, but like it also just looks like suede or like velour or something, but like, you know, it's not. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, maybe I'm just like revealing how like fucked I am in the head, but I'm like, that's pretty, let's put that in the bin.
What evolutionary trick is this mould playing with me to make it look, that looks nice, maybe not.
Yeah, that kind of moss, mould, decay, like. But yeah,
so what you were saying about the scale of an army kind of made me think about something that kind of really brought it home for me was I painted some Carcharodons. Now that was a 1,500 point army, Space Marines and stuff. Now they're in a grey, they're very down and dirty, they're covered in muck and blood. They're sharks called Caradon Astra.
Yeah.
Now, I deliberately picked that because I had a project I was working on, and then I had to move house, and it was like, right, I can work on this because there's not a great deal of conversion, unusually for me.
Right.
I'm just going to paint them in an interesting fashion.
Are they a faction that exist in the lore, or?
Yeah.
There's several novels for them. They have a Forge World model, Tiberus, giant Terminator with massive lightning claws.
Sorry, yeah, I threw you off there. So go on. So you were saying it seemed like an easy project for you to take on while you were in between stuff.
Yeah, it was just because I could just build Space Marines and do minimal additions, skulls, totems. I could just keep a little baggie of bits I could glue on. And it was just to make the interesting thing be the paint job rather than the conversions, which is my default thing. But on the table, I kind of had this kind of shakabuku moment of realisation. Right, these guys are down and dirty, and they're going to be very dark on the back. They're coming out the depths of the water, and they're very white towards the front. And they're going to be covered in blood and grime. Are they going to look really muddy as an army and not stand out? And there was a definite sense of what you were saying there, of not doing too much.
Yeah.
I could have laboured and done a lot more detail, but it was really quite freeing and refreshing just to get Blood for the Blood God technical paint and flick it on them, having sponged on, a little bit of sponge in a pair of tweezers, and sponge on just damage. And then when I got to the sergeant in a squad sometimes, not always, but the lieutenants and the captains and the people with impressive hats, give them a bit more love and a bit more detail, and on top of that sponging, add some.
Yeah. Were you doing more for like the captain? You say captains, right? But like when you came to a kind of like a hero character within that, let's say, were you doing more detail in terms of like more grit and stuff like that, or were you kind of making them a little bit more polished, a little bit more clean to stand out? I'm interested.
That's where the art department guy and the role player. It's amazing how much in my day job as a art department carpenter and scenic painter, it's I have conversations with production designers about the story, and I'm like, am I building a D&D character? Am I painting their castle, the clubhouse for the gang?
So you're kind of role playing it out, like you're building that narrative, like, oh,
Why am I doing this?
how old is this? Why is and it's that person has probably more battle damage, but then they would be, what they've got is a relic and is more loved because it's 10,000 years old, so it is revered in a religious fashion, so it might have been buffed up, but the fact that it is battle damaged and worn, so you can play that game and you can go, 40k so mad, so mad, all the bad ideas, turn it up to 11, everything at 11, everything louder than everything else.
that was something you really stood out to me, that you helped me with one of my minis, where it was like a little minor conversion that I did on mine, right? Do you remember the guy that had like he had like a fence on his back? It's like a bit of fence, and it looked fucking cool. And it had like some skulls on it. And I was like, I really just, because I was like thinking of it just purely from like a graphic sense, I wanted the skulls to just be like pure red, like just red. Like, think like, who's the Hellboy Artist? He kind of draws and like, colours in that very kind of block graphic style. And I wanted it to kind of look like that. And then you were like, yeah, but like, think about the story that mini's got. What's its weapon? What's the weapon? Like, it should, if it was to have that, it should have a weapon that is then, you know, bloody because it's got this bloody skull sort of thing.
There's a reason to tie these things in.
And I was like, that's really interesting. And then it led me on to, he had like a plasma pistol. Yeah, this is it. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna make them black, like pure matte black. So it's like they're charred skulls. Like he's got this dodgy, because again it's chaos, and it was like, you know, the plasma's red, and I kind of made it look like it was leaking and kind of dripping and like malfunctioning anyway. And it's this idea that like, but the skulls remained, and it's just like this charred, blackened thing.
On it.
Yeah, and on it goes onto the fence, and it's like that instantly. Like, not only did it like look cool, but like with your little bit of advice, it was like, it just ties in really nicely. It's interesting.
Yeah. Always that story ticking over of role play. That model.
Yeah, is that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, is that role play with the.
Always be role playing.
Yeah. What was so like? Yeah, so you found kind of like pulling back with the detail actually made them like pop more.
Yeah.
With the car carry-ons. That's cool. I like that. Yeah, 'cause again, I'm yet to like kind of face like painting an army. I've got a handful of.
You've got a kill team kind of ish scale thing happening.
Yeah, and I've tackled a few slightly bigger models that wouldn't obviously be viable for a kill team. So like, I've got a venom crawler, and I just wanted to challenge myself with something bigger, and immediately hated that idea.
Immediately hated it. Why though? Just because you had to follow instructions, you were banging your head against that to a degree, weren't you?
Yeah, so I forced myself to put it together as the instructions say, for one, because it was just like, it's a bit more complex. Like, I'm familiar with a human, physiology. I've seen these. Yeah, I've seen these before. I know. So you kind of, I knew enough of the rules of how a human goes together to not know how to like break it and kit bash it. Whereas like this thing, I was like, I don't really know, and it's not like it goes together in the traditional way of like, body, head, legs. It's like
spider-ish,
yeah. So I'm just going to put it together. I've got two anyway, so I'll probably fuck the other one up. But like
that's why I got you two.
So I put that one together like traditionally, and then it was just kind of the challenge of again like seeing how those colours would come together and like work on just like a bigger piece. It's like it's got that big body, hasn't it, at the back, kind of the main body. It's just a big ball.
Thorax.
Yeah.
Thorax?
Yeah, like a thorax something.
But
whatever colour you put there, it's very easy to make it look a bit, I don't know, for me it just felt a bit shit, do you know what I mean? But I didn't want to also just cop out and just like make it well dirty, so it was like finding ways to break that up in like an interesting way.
You did almost in a very painterly way that you put blobs of colour. You sketched out patches of colour, as I remember, and then went towards the what you would call the army colour.
Yeah.
So your guys are predominantly yellow, almost like you've got a naughty Imperial Fists kind of thing.
Yeah, I just wanted something punchy. Like again, like I wanted like a Chaos Army that wasn't brown. And obviously you've got like the bright coloured Chaos Army. It's not like they don't exist, but I just really I was like yellow, like it's bright happy colour.
It gives you a place to go high, so that the lows look low. Contrast. Everybody says contrast, but it's contrast. Yeah, something to pop to.
I kind of almost like cell shading-y, but that wasn't the final result. But that's kind of how it looks when I start. It's like blob of colour here, blob of colour there.
How did you find yellow? Because yellow is traditionally a difficult colour to work with, because to go lighter with yellow, you end up getting very pale and chalky and white.
How do I find working with yellow?
Yeah, just because in terms of model painters often talk about that as being a problem, but you're somebody that has painted with watercolours, and that's again on a white piece of paper.
Yeah, I think, because it's interesting, because I have heard that, and that was kind of what made me actually want to try it, because it's like, people saying it's hard, I was like, how hard?
How hard? Yeah.
But like, and I'm not going to be like, oh yeah, well it's actually really not hard, but like, I think for me, like, I'm essentially cheating, because like, my like style like allows for those sorts of like imperfections. Like, I don't know how, the best way to maybe answer is, I don't know how comfortable I'd feel if someone said paint some Imperial Fist. I'd be like,
Well, here's a surprise. Next.
Yeah, maybe.
Yes. Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm not one for challenges.
Because mine has a more like graphic look to it in the way that I paint. Like
painterly or graphic?
Painterly, graphic, like, you know.
Think a graphic, I think, you know, hard lines.
Like some of my stuff did, like that thing that I completely kit bashed from like bits and pieces. That
bits and pieces.
Toy shop guy, wasn't he? It's like,
it was mostly a toy from like a supermarket that I got, and I was like, oh, that kind of looks like a dreadnought, like, but very much not. I wonder if I could prime it and paint it up, and it would just be like a fun kind of thing. And that almost, had like a kind of, not Funko Pop, but like, just because of the nature of the design of it, it had that sort of thing to it. And it was interesting, again, like finding the line of like how graphic to go versus how like painterly, like you say, to go. Painterly is probably a better way of putting it, but I suppose, it's more that like, I like that kind of like unnatural pop of colour. Even like in a film, do you know what I mean? There's certain cinematographers that like use very like unnatural kind of like light compositions and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? It's evocative, you know, and it's not to like knock like people that like. It's also because I realise like my technical ceiling, and I'm like, oh, I can do that really well or pretty well, but like, I'll just get really stressed out if I try and like do something that looks like bang on, because my technical ability just isn't there yet.
I mean, it's interesting that you would pick something like that, and as I've often said to people, do a palette cleanser. If you're stuck with a project, a big army or whatever, just do something different. If you've been painting nothing but robots, paint something organic. If you've been painting something with lots of large panels, paint something with small details. Change it up. You know, a change is as good as a rest. Go a different way. I mean, it's a fucking mess at the minute, but I often, if I'm stuck, will just go and have a tidy. I'll just rummage through stuff. I mean, you can see my build, the build side is more developed, and the paint side is, you know, all those paint racks that are empty at the minute. But, you know, this is work in progress. I've got some more bits of furniture that arrived yesterday to change up that bit that's underneath there, and the desk will go across. Anyway, long story short, I'll just jump into that and start tidying up, and I'll find that bit of shit and go, oh, that is really nice. And all of a sudden it's the central piece of a diorama or a whatnot. You know, I've got a diorama up on the shelf there that I want to start doing things with.
You're spot on there, actually. I'm really fortunate in that. So basically when I literally messaged you after like one of my friends was like you know, some 40k army, so that we can play some kill team or 40k or whatever. Yeah. And I messaged you like, what would one need to do? And then like within I think a week you'd sent me like several kits and like paintbrushes and paints, and I was like, fuck.
Yeah, what have I done?
Yeah, what have I done? But you also sent me like some like pre-made stuff, like that you got from like a mate and someone had given you, or from the club or something like that. And you're right, like sometimes if I'm like struggling or I'm hitting a bit of a wall and I not inspired maybe to build or kit bash or even just glue something together, I'll just rummage through that and go like, that's a cool model, like, I think I could do something with that.
it's why I gave you those ones, is so that you can be less precious, because a lot of people, there's a big thing in the hobby as a whole, is that like, well, I've got this kit, and it's a shame that people put on themselves about how many kits they've got that they've not built. And naturally, capitalism and the content hose says, look at the new thing, look at the new thing. And we naturally are excited by the new thing, and we want to get the new thing because we've got new ideas. And then you kind of, so you've got the new stuff, and you had all that on sprue, but you also had that box of box of, you know, models that were older than you, some of them. And if you don't know that, and you're not precious about it, and you just go, that guy's cool, I like that. But it just gives you that ability to go, well, that's made, I'm going to try this base coat out and this wash.
Yeah.
And you have more freedom with that pound shop model or that box of stuff.
Yeah.
And also it's quite handy, you know, it's freeing if you don't have to spend that time clipping it out, knocking off mould lines, putting it together. You know, you get to just jump right in to the thing. You're not.
It's the same reason, like, I like, again, like watercolor and like sketch when I'm working in like a 2D format. It's like people go, oh, like, why is that your chosen, you know, medium? And I'm like, oh, because it's well easy. I'm like, there's so few like humps or hurdles for me to get past.
Yeah.
I'm like, I need a bit of paper and like a pencil, and then if I want to do colour, then like, watercolour. I'm like, I don't even necessarily need water if I've got like enough spit in my mouth. Like, I can get by. Maybe not in these times, like, you know, like those, but like, I mean, I have actually stopped doing that because, like, but for a time there was like, if I was only working on like a little, because I would work really small as well, which I know you always hate. You'd be like, get a big bit of paper and go big.
I don't like getting to the edge and going, oh shit, now I've got to tape another bit of paper on the side, you know.
Right, yeah.
Because because of role play, so it'd be like, I draw my characters, I draw my friends' characters, and it was always like, you know, that kind of something you'd stick on your character sheet. It'd be like a small thing, but or like, and again, I DM a lot. Like I'm a game master, I would say, like predominantly in the hobby. So it's always like a quick sketch of like a villain or a monster or something.
Yeah.
And I think that influences, again, like the 40k stuff and the mini stuff, because I'm like coming at it from like that kind of character, like design point of view of like, oh, these are like cool monsters that I would throw at my mates or throw at the party, sort of thing, and like design them that way. So I'll just draw something up and it'll be like, some 4-arm hulking thing in armour. And I'm like, that's just a cool thing that if you're at the table and your GM throws that at you, you're going to be like, oh, sick. You know, you're not going to be like, what's its stat block?
Yeah, what is it? You know, it's like that pound shop guy of yours, you know, I refer to him as your obliterator, because in my head canon, the scale of him, his armament, is that of an obliterator or a mutilator, or, you know, that kind of thing. As long as the people you're playing know what that is, then I think wilder conversions can happen.
Again, a bit of naivete in that, like, I don't know, you know, how I appreciate there's maybe a little bit of an awkwardness if like someone's army makes no sense and you've got like a big army. There's something where like your opponent needs to understand what you're putting on the table, so that they know what they're fighting against, and it's like you shouldn't be doing it to kind of like throw them off, sort of thing.
King has got to look like your king, your queen's got to look like your queen, your pawns, knights.
Yeah, I mean,
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, I made my own chess set the other day, so I understand the concept, the principle. Yeah.
I hear it's quite popular.
Yeah, chess. Yeah, it's really taken off.
It might catch on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was really funny actually when I was like going over the rules of chess. This is like a complete tangent. I was reading it and it was like there's this rule that's, I don't know if it's like used in all tournaments or whatever, but it's like something when you can like swap the rook with another piece or whatever, and it's like this rule was brought to the game in 1500 and something, and I'm like, what? I'm like, they were adding expansion packs to chess back in the 1500s.
That's the equivalent of the old world exploding and Age of Sigmar happening, and everybody, I'm not playing with this anymore. And people set alight an army that they've been building over years and go, I can't play this anymore. I mean, mate, your book's still on the shelf, the rules are still there, nobody burgled you. You can still play chess like that.
What's this? Like, talk to me about this a little bit more. So what, they like basically got rid of Age of Sigmar?
No, there was the Warhammer Old World,
Right. Okay.
which was much more kind of Tolkien fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't all that interesting when you can consider that they can make these spectacular models that people will just go, they walk down the road and they'll see it in the window of the shop and go, screech, and they'll look at this giant bastard riding a giant dragon with 3 giant heads and giant wings and go, I want to paint that. And the models are more interesting.
Was there not room to add that, like in the? I'm just curious. Like, was there not room to?
They'd reached the end of a creative road, and it was something like 16% of their income. And you know what? They're a business in late stage capitalism. They've got to create, and they've got staff they've got to pay, and they've got to buy in materials and push materials out and put them in lorries and pay for the petrol on those lorries, and it's much of your spreadsheet. Sorry, we can't keep doing this. You're flogging a dead horse.
The new fantasy stuff's like massive, isn't it? Like, I know loads of people that are like well into it.
It's engaged people.
Yeah, like some of my mates have just got some of the models to paint because they're just like, when they're buying their 40k stuff, they've seen these like more fantasy-esque models and they're like, oh, they look really cool. Like, want to paint them up, which is
the shit. Yeah, there you go.
There's a video online, recently. I mean, look, I'd never touched Sigmar models until a little while ago. I'll do it, Catherine. I've put a different head. Look, she's got a gold head. I felt bad that I'd got one of the female wizards.
Yeah.
The sister of Kagra. Yeah, so she's got her original head and she's lovely. And I didn't know at the time that the sorceress was the sister.
The sorceress didn't give it away for you, no?
No.
I didn't read that word. I just ripped open the box. and just got to the toys. It's not a game I play. And I've come from the angle of a kit basher. Yeah, so I didn't want to upset Arnold gender swapping. So I made one of the big burly lads a lady, and I got a head from a Sigmarite, hence the gold colour. Because they do the gold plastic for the gold models and the dark grey plastic for the bad guys.
Would it be too disgusting, or like, can't you? A lot of those models, I look at them and I'm like, oh, you stick a power pack on that.
A mate of mine is working on a Emperor's Children army that is all based on corrupting. They've got very classic armour styles in the knights in armour from the Sigmar range, and he's putting in elements, and I'm sure he's not the first to do it. When I built these guys originally, I put a Space Marine head on as a bit of a joke, but it was just as a way of throwing on a different head and seeing what that did to the silhouette. Do I want to trim off all the cybernetic bullshit?
What it does to the story as well, right? Like, again, it's a story. Like, as soon as you see, a knight, but with a jetpack and a laser eye, you're like, that's evocative, you know.
Yeah, there's ways to do it.
Yeah, your little gaming group. What are you looking forward to? Because I'm already clocking away with ideas for Stargrave, and I know you've played some Frostgrave, or we had a couple of games, and
so I really love Frostgrave. Actually, really enjoy it. I haven't played enough of it. Like, I say I love it, but because when I've looked at the book on my own, I'm a bit and it is it should be it is super simple, and I'm just yeah, when I played it, I loved it, and it was the game that felt most like the sort of tabletop game I'd want to play. Not to harp back to the world of 40k too much, but it's I remember kind of saying to you, one of the things that I was underwhelmed by when we played Kill Team was yeah, you both roll 5 times to find out nothing happens. And it's a bit whereas it always felt like there was a nice kind of momentum to Frostgrave. I'd rather die quickly than survive in a dull manner. Do you know what I mean?
I think 40k is getting better at that. Certainly the newer iterations, we're getting closer to what you read in a book and what you read in your codex happens on the table. So you were saying Frostgrave, and I mentioned Stargrave. Has that hit your radar with your group of lads?
I heard about it and was okay, so it's Frostgrave. I mean, it's Frostgrave in space, right?
Essentially, yeah. Give or take, in much the way that Star Wars is fantasy in space in many ways. Wizards and lights and laser swords. I think Joe McCullough, that wrote Frostgrave and is doing, amongst other games, Stargrave. It's intriguing, and it's a handful of models. It's model agnostic, so you can kit bash more wildly or just grab models from the pound shop or wherever else. I think it's captains, first officers, and in much the same way in Frostgrave you can have a knight and a master at arms and innumerous thugs or red shirts just to get murked as soon as they land on the planet and get eaten by a sentient slime or in a horrible misunderstanding or a teleporter accident. As long as you've got somebody to beat Worf up to show how bad a situation we're in.
Just how tough they are. Yeah.
Oh, we must be in trouble. But he gets punched in the face in every.
Yeah, they did Worf dirty. I'm sorry. I love TNG and I love Worf, but they make him look like a lightweight.
Michael Dorn took one on the chin for that franchise. Week in, week out. Yeah.
Why does everything got to be true love with you? Just fake it, baby.
Fake it. Oh, it's not a thing I expected to be doing. I struggle with bolt action. I mean, it's a great game. It's a great game. I've had a couple of demo games. I had played in a demo game down at the club, and Dan and I had a little game early on in the lockdown. Dan's my old housemate, one of the OG members of the club. And it's a great system. The activation system is great. You've got as many units as you've got on the table, as many units as you've got on the table go in a bag, and you blind pull.
Yeah. I love this.
So that dynamic is great.
Yeah.
Because if you pull lots of dice out the bag and you move and you're smashing and shooting, you move and shoot that unit or a unit per dice. Your early game is strong. But then now your opponent knows that he's going to pull a load out, and if it's one and you go, I go, there's still that tension that at some point there'll be a little blip.
You blind pull.
Yeah. I love that system. That's
that
cool.
dynamic is great.
Yeah.
But the models are boring. I would go nuts. No, it's why I like the 40k universe. I keep harping on about it, but.
Yeah, it's totally divorced, and that's my thing. I like it, the fantasy element, because it's totally divorced from that. It's like, you know, I'm happy to play any games. I mean, say we played like a sci-fi zombicide, and again, it's like we all have fun with that.
Sci-fi zombicide? What?
The people that made Zombicide just made like a space version where it's like
zombies in space. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think they're like zombies, but it's like they function the same way as zombies and stuff.
They sound like they play a lot of games. There's a
Yeah.
Kickstarting everything.
Like next week. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah. It's like, what are we going to play next week? Yeah, like Dead Man's Hand. Is that what I'm thinking of? It's like a western.
Western. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like really good. And again, I love it just because like it's a proper like simplistic game where they're like, yeah, you can basically do like every turn, do like one of, you know, 2 of 3 things, and then you know, take your turn, and it's just like last man standing, and you're having like a little shootout in a you know, dusty western town, and it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And you have like, you know, a little posse.
Yeah.
But then you've got all these like really nicely like made you know, saloons and stuff made out of lollipop sticks and stuff, which is quite impressive. Yeah.
Brown.
Yeah.
Maybe some red.
Maybe some red and a gold lettering.
Apparently, those towns were actually really colourful in that time. Yeah. But like, just because what we're used to seeing in like westerns, we think of them as brown.
Yeah, we see them 150 years later in the desert, and somebody goes, "Oh, well, they must have looked like that." It's like, no, but they were.
They used it.
Those.
You know, like your mum's pink capri. She didn't buy it pink; it was bright red in 1972. You know, sorry, your grand's capri. Yeah. Anyway, let's not talk about capris. That's the other podcast. You mentioned Necromunda the other day. Is that something they're interested in?
Yeah, like Necromunda. So my question to you was like, so I played like a handful of games of that, and I thought it was like, again, this is like my AD. I thought it was like a kind of cyberpunk type setting, and then I was listening to some lore videos by one of the guys from the club. What's the name of his channel?
Oh, Ian, Arbitorian. Yeah,
Arbitorian. Yeah, sick channel.
Yeah, he's slick.
I was enjoying it, and there was a couple, like when he was talking about squats, I mean, he was talking about the arbiters crossing over into into like Necromunda, and I was like, wait, what? Like, it was like, yeah. So I was just a bit like, I didn't realise it was all. So is it the same universe, or?
Yeah.
It's all one universe. Yeah. The Emperor of Mankind and Space Marines exist in Necromunda. Necromunda as a planet is actually, and you'll like this, was won over by the Imperial Fists. You know, your big yellow Space Marines.
Yeah.
So, you know, in the grand story, God, and Necromunda, I forget what the original name of the planet was. We're like, no. How about you join us? And the Imperial Fists went, and they went, okay.
Yeah, okay.
I think the problem was that there was some alien nonsense, warp gates of some kind. I forget who it alludes to. You know, often we allude to Necrons, and often we allude to ancient evil of some other description. Sometimes they don't even have playable army factions in the fluff, in the story. It's not always a Tyrannid or a Necron or a this or a that. It will be something other, but you can't buy that army in lead or plastic and play it on a table. You can, but you would have to count it as something, like I do with my Chaos Squats that I run as orcs. Anyway, tangent. So the Imperial Fists take over this planet, but these aliens with their warp gates go, ooh, what's this? And it kicks off, and an alien fire, warp fire, burns the planet to a crisp. And the only thing that remains, it may have borrowed it from 2000 AD, you know, in that you've got the city blocks, hab blocks, and in between is a burned ash waste. Similar to that, you know, a city is made up of these colossal spires that survived this nonsense. So Necromunda has it produces arms and ammunition, and the population are scooped up for the Imperial Guard and for the Imperial Fists. They use it as a source of meat. They will take young gang members and scourge them full of the Gene Seed project, and they will turn them into murderous zealot warrior monks for the fascist regime of humanity.
So then when you're playing Necromunda, you're playing as like the people running around on the streets.
It's like the spire is literally a wedge of humanity, and at the top is the 1%, and we spread down to the people that are making nutrient paste and ammunition. 18 hours a day in peak capitalism to...
How interesting that they just like, built a whole thing, just like, we're going to just zoom in on this one planet that has, and like play it like that, and it's just a more... So what's the difference then? How does Necromunda function versus like a kill team?
I'm not overly familiar with how Necromunda plays on the table now, because I played it way back in the day. I played it in White Dwarf articles when it was called Confrontation, and it's evolved into Necromunda. I think you could buy it as a box, and this is like early to mid 90s, and it had cardboard terrain with plastic sections, and I'd never even touched that. I got out of the hobby because you came along. Games Workshop have reimagined it with their beautiful digital sculpts, but I understand it runs in a similar number of models, but what it does is it has a campaign system built into it. Now Kill Team does have that, but to a lesser extent, I believe. Kill Team kind of comes from 40k over here. There's Kill Team, and then Necromunda is much more on the human scale rather than the superhuman scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's always that kind of like meeting of like the fluff or the lore or
fluff and
they scratch different itches, and kind of going back to what you said earlier about Kill Team is oddly holds on to some of the rules from an older edition of 40k. It's like 7th edition, whereas 40k stopped that, did 8th edition, now we're in 9th edition, new 40k, where they've streamlined it a lot, and they're getting a better handle on that, and you get a smoother game.
Cool.
It's the thing I've always said is, can sometimes be incongruous with like role-playing games, is like, a lot of the time a fight in a role-playing game is the least exhilarating part of the game. And like, a fight should be exhilarating, like not necessarily encouraged, right? Like, I'm not saying like, but it was like, sometimes you'd be avoiding fights, not because like you wanted to avoid a fight from like a tactical or a narrative sense, but just because like you didn't want to spend the next 4 hours trying to resolve it, like with like dice and stuff.
If the mood of the table isn't, you don't get a sense as a GM, that would be appreciated.
It's something I do appreciate, like with any game, right? It's that kind of like, granularity comes from a really cool idea. Do you know what I mean? There's a cool idea. You want options to do things. It would be, it'd be really, really boring if every tabletop game ran off of the same thing, and it's like you have the same weapon, and it's just you versus me, just shooting each other with the same gun. There's not a lot of variation in that. But then it's like, what you kind of maybe have to appreciate is every time you add a variant, so it's like, there's 2 different types of guns that you can carry. Instantly, that's like a paragraph more of like rules, and it's like the more interesting stuff you add, the more potentially less fun the actual game part of it can be, in a weird way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At least for me, like, that's always a weird thing where I'm like, it sounds exciting out here, and when you're making the rules. And I've toyed with developing my own like roleplay system just after years of tweaking and house ruling our own like stuff that we've played.
When your really clunky 80 roleplay game has got so many sheets in it of house rules and asterisks and notes of how you've tweaked it, what is actually left of the original game, and then you just take all those out, put them in a ring binder, and that's your game.
It virtually was becoming that. But what we realise is, our kind of MO is none of us are like really amazing with rules, and like a lot of stuff would just get left behind. But we've roleplayed for years and understood it. We wanted like a really, really simple system that like. But it's like for every like cool idea you come up with, you're like, oh, but that's like another system in and of itself, or that's something that someone would feasibly want to do in a roleplay system. Again, it's like a car chase should be really exhilarating.
Yeah, should feel fast. But
combat should be really exciting. But like quite often, it's a system. It's a whole other system within the game that doesn't. So none of you are familiar with it. You all have to crack open the books and kind of muddle through it.
Your game of Frostgrave, you've got to get Gaslands out and lay out templates. Can you do that? Can't you do that? This evening,
Yeah, exactly.
You want to not include it. You don't want to be like, oh, well, that just never happens, because it's like absurd to think that wouldn't ever happen. If you're running an action-oriented game, the idea that like someone wouldn't get in a vehicle and chase someone in another vehicle is just absurd.
They all come from a good place, but they don't. Yeah, it's difficult to refine that.
But there is that kind of like thing of like, oh yeah, well then I see how those things that I don't like in other games come to be. It's almost like a point proven thing as well. I think I feel like it's almost like a thing of someone at some point asked for it, right? Someone was like, why is there not a thing for this? And they've gone, well, here, this is how it would work. And it's like, oh yeah, it's not that fun actually. The subscribing thing, I think you should try it in a way where you're not cringing for every moment of it.
That other bit of furniture arrived, so it's changed again, and I've got pictures up. So what was this? A
success. A rousing success.
Absolutely.
Universally
adored by both critics and fans.
Totally. Who are ringing that bell, subscribing, and having us Patreon, buying us a coffee. I don't know. Maybe one day those things.
Sharing, commenting. Let us know what you thought, what you'd like to see us discuss. If you disagree with something or everything we said.
So what has this been? It's been a roaring success, and we've chatted some shit. We've introduced ourselves so that anything we say from here on out, you will take as
We've added the context now that anything we say up to this point, we aren't responsible for, because you already know.
Empty skulls.
Empty skulls. Oh, that's the name of the thing.
What did you fucking expect? What?
Yeah.
There's a warning there,
Welcome to the outro to the intro of what we're going to be doing monthly, if we can.
So that was more us talking so that you've got some context. We'll probably talk about more news.
Focus in on interesting topics, stuff that catches our eye. We've got a few ideas knocking around. Let us know if you have any ideas of things that you're interested in, and would like to hear our takes on it.
Constructive criticism. Google that, constructive criticism, and then type a comment.
No, I want the most unconstructive criticism possible. Tell me about who I am as a person, the way I dress, the decor of my house, possibly the way I was raised.
Yeah. Oh well. Fuck.
Yeah.
Please don't do those things.
Look, you've got this far, you find us vaguely tolerable. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, and you'll find out when more of this nonsense is wallowing around in the bottom of the internet.
If you dislike it, I'll find you and come for you and your family.
He'll come round and fucking give you a really bad haircut.
I'm incapable of that.
Legit. I'm buying it.
Yeah.